welcome you back. It's good to see you. We had excellent crowd this morning, and that illustrated that most of our people who had been sick were back with us. We have a few who are still out with illnesses, but we're glad that you're here. And I know the Brooms are happy. They have their family here, especially the newest member. And instead of having to run off to see that baby, the baby has come to you, Melissa, and we're happy for you. Let me say two or three things before we begin the sermon tonight. I appreciate the very kind things you had to say about the lesson on compassion this morning. I think that I felt that sermon in a greater way than I feel many sermons. It kind of welled up inside me, and I delivered that, and you were very gracious about it. And I thought, as two people responded to the invitation this morning, that we had an excellent opportunity to demonstrate compassion. Compassion is not just for folks who need food and clothing and personal items, but compassion we show toward one another. When we say, I feel for you, I sympathize with what you're going through. And so it was a wonderful occasion just to demonstrate our compassion, and I thank you for that. I have long said that I thrill when somebody comes forward and about half the congregation comes with them. And that's just so they don't have to sit up here by themselves. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful show of compassion. We talked about folks who are sick, and I will tell you that the Miller household has taken a little hit here. Jody is having a lot of trouble with her right knee. As a matter of fact, she has a doctor's appointment Wednesday to see about that. And they're going to see if she needs surgery or what she needs. But you notice she had a brace on this morning and this evening, and she's having a great difficulty walking, a lot of pain in that knee. So please keep her in your prayers. And I have joined the ranks of Wayne Claxton and Al Flores in having atrial AFib. And so I'm going Tuesday to see about that. They said, your heart's not in rhythm. And they said, do you feel anything? I said, no. Are you short of breath? No. You get tired? No more than usual. You have any pain? No. Well, it doesn't matter. Your heart's not in rhythm. So we're going to go see about that. So keep us in your prayers, please. And Sierra, bless her heart's on her way home. She's on the road. At last report, they were somewhere in southern Georgia. Now, that's a place to be caught. And so I don't know how they're getting along, but they're on their way, and I appreciate that very much. Please remember that next Sunday in the adult program on Sunday morning, we're changing classes. We're doing something a little different. We're going to 2 classes on Sunday morning for the adults. And I'm not going to get into any discussion about which class is best or whose is best or anything like that. I just will tell you that the one in the auditorium is on Genesis, the book of beginnings. And Chris is going to teach that. And he does a fine job teaching a class. And that's for people who feel more comfortable coming in and being in the auditorium class. And there are some people who just feel really good about, I made it through the doors, I'm in the auditorium, and I'm going to stay there. And you are welcome to do that. I'll be teaching a class in the multipurpose room on the family. We're going to be talking about the human family, the nuclear family, and the Christian family. And somebody asked me this morning what the nuclear family was, if that was one that blows up. I think that's another idea. Nuclear family means a unit. And so it's like your family, mom, dad, the kids, whoever's in your family. So we're going to be talking about all of the aspects of family. And it's designed for our younger people. It's designed for young couples who have children, and you're welcome to come to that class. It's open to all, but that's who it's designed for. So you keep that in mind and get in one of the classes next Sunday morning, and you certainly will be welcome there. We're continuing our series of lessons on Sunday night on the 10 words. That's what the Jews would have called the 10 Commandments. That's kind of interesting to us because a word does not always imply a single word. We say to somebody, "Can I have a word with you?" Well, that doesn't mean I'm going to say, "Hi," and I'm done. It means I'd like to have a little bit of your time. I'd like to talk with you. So when they said the 10 words, they were talking about the 10 Commandments. And we are talking tonight from Genesis 20, 4, 5, and 6. So you may want to turn there or read it on the screen if you'd like to. But this is the text for tonight. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth, and you shall not bow down to them nor serve them. That's pretty clear, isn't it? My grandfather would say, you have to have help to misunderstand that. I think he's just simply saying, no idols, people. Don't have any graven images. Don't have any idol gods that you bow down to. Well, let's do a little bit of work on introduction. Let's get in our minds the direction that we're going with this study tonight. At first, this commandment sounds like a recapitulation of the first one. Because the first one was, thou shalt have no other gods before me. No other gods. Now this one says, no graven images. And you're saying, what's the difference? It sounds like the same thing. Well, it's really not. And I think we'll see that as we go along. The Israelites had a problem with this one. Remember that they had been in Egypt for 10 generations. And they had been exposed to the gods of the Egyptians, and those were idols. So they knew about idolatry. They knew about idol gods. And so as they began the journey from Egypt to the promised land, one of the first things that God says is, you get that out of your mind. I don't want you to have any other gods before me, and I don't want you to have a graven image. I don't want that. No idols at all. And yet, they broke that almost as soon as God said it. If you go to Exodus 32, you find that God is giving Moses the written law. He had been on the mountain before, but this time God with his finger, an anthropomorphic term, because he's spiritual, he doesn't really have fingers, but it shows that he was actively involved in that. He was writing the 10 Commandments on tables of stone. And he got to this second one, no graven images. What was Israel doing? If you know the story, they noticed that God had been gone, or Moses had been gone for some time, and they got really upset about that. And they said to Aaron, who was the high priest, Moses' brother, should have known better, they said, make us an idol. We need something to bow down to. So he said, give me your jewelry. So the men and the women all donated their jewelry. And Aaron molded it down and made a golden calf. And he said, here's your God. Now, isn't that something? Moses was on the mountain getting the commandment, no idols, and they were down on the lower ground making an idol. And how's that for timing? And you may remember that Moses came down the mountain and he heard all of the revelry, all of the dancing and celebrating, and he was so angry that he threw down the tables of stone and broke them. Well, why not? They were breaking them, just in a different way, but he physically broke them. Had to go back up for the third time and get other tables of stone. But they had a propensity toward idols. They had been introduced to them in Egypt, and here they were coming out of Egypt toward the promised land, and they made themselves an idol. They had known about Baal. They had known about Molech. They had known about all of these false gods, and they just couldn't get that out of their heads. Now, the point is, for them and for us, is if we're going to please Him, we have to have a clear vision of who God is. And you can't put God in a box. You can't carve God out of a tree stump. You can't get jewelry and melt it down and mold God. We have to have a clear vision of who God is. Now, so consider the context. What's the context? I will have to tell you that our dear friend Rusty back there, who runs some of the stuff that's being sent out over the air, is having far too much fun getting shots of me as I'm up here preaching and teaching and giving them titles. And you may be seeing some of them on the back of a bulletin coming to you very soon. But there's one of them where I'm looking like this, and his line beneath it is context, context, context. And maybe I look like that when I say context, context, context. Now, some of them are a whole lot funnier than that, and I'll tell you about those at some other time. But what is the context? When God appeared on Mount Sinai, He did so without form. God's Spirit. John 4:24. God is Spirit, and they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. And so, how do you make a likeness of someone who is Spirit? It reminds me a little bit of the little girl, maybe you've heard this story, but it's a great one, who was drawing and coloring on the table. Her mother said, "Honey, what are you drawing?" She said, "A picture of God." And her mother said, "Well, honey, nobody knows what God looks like." And the little girl said, "They will when I get through." But it seems like we all want a picture of God. What's God look like? You cannot determine that. God is not flesh and blood. God does not have physical form. God is a spiritual being. And any likeness we would make, whatever it was, would be inadequate as far as God is concerned. But when people are weak, when they are ignorant, they try to represent God by some image. Go with me to Romans chapter 1, and I'll read beginning at verse 22. And just let me say that this is about Gentilism. This is about the sinfulness of people who did not know God. Verse 22 says, "Professing to be wise, they became fools." The next verse, "And changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things." He says, they thought they were smart, but they were fools. And they tried to mold God to look like a man, or a four-footed beast, or some bird. They had to have a physical representation of God. I think we're still like that a lot. We want a God we can see and a God we can touch. And unless we can see Him and touch Him and smell Him and taste Him and all of those things, we can't really believe there's God. In Acts chapter 17, we have the great sermon by Paul on Mars Hill. Now you have to know that Mars Hill was the place where the wise men, the philosophers, went to debate things. And they carried on debates day after day after day. And this is in the city of Athens. And Paul got to town, and he said, "As I passed by and beheld your devotions, I saw that you have an altar with this inscription of the unknown God. Him that you ignorantly worship, Him declare I to you." He said, "I noticed you got a lot of idols, and you've even got one that it says to an unknown God, just in case you left somebody out. And if a God shows up that you don't have an idol to, you can say, 'Oh, well, we've got one, we just didn't know what to call it. We didn't know your name, but we made an idol to you.'" And I want you to read with me, beginning at verse 24 of that chapter. God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life and breath and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has predetermined, preappointed times with boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. Truly, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. What does Paul say they did? They started making their own gods. They started molding a God that suited them. Instead of recognizing God as creator, they became the creator. Instead of letting God mold them, they molded him. We do a pretty good job of that today. We decide what we want God to look like. And we mold our God. And we bow down to him. And the second commandment says, no graven images. And if you want to know how serious God is about this, all you have to do is to go back to Exodus 20, verses 5 and 6, and right after saying, don't make any gods, he said, if you do, I'm going to punish you for generations to come. I'm going to visit affliction upon you. I am not going to let you get by with making idol gods. Now, what's the application? I have a couple of applications, and they're rather obvious. The first one is that we really do have an image of God. Now you say, wait a minute, you just said we don't. We have an image. It's Jesus. You remember when Jesus and Philip were having a discussion, it's recorded in John chapter 14, beginning at verse 7. Philip said, show us the Father, and it suffices us. And Jesus said, look at me. Have I been with you so long that you've forgotten that to see the Father is to see me is to see the Father? If you go over to Colossians chapter 1 and verse 15, it says that he is the very visible representation of God. If you want to see God, you look at God's Son. How often do we say, like Father, like Son? Now, for some, that's a real compliment. For others, it's like, oh, no. But you think about that. If you want to see the Father, look at the Son. If you want to know what the Father's like, look at what the Son did while he was on earth. If you want to know that the Father's compassionate, look at the compassion of the Son. If you want to know that the Father's loving, look at the love of the Son. To see the Father is to see the Son. To see the Son is to see the Father. So we really do have a representation. We really do have an image. It's not an idol, but we have Jesus. But in spite of all of this, and that's all we need, by the way, but in spite of this, people get all excited today about the Shroud of Turin. Is that really the burial cloth of Jesus? Oh. What's the deal? Even if it is, what's the deal? Has it become a sacred relic that we bow down to? Or we get all excited about some religious icon? Well, in our house, we have this picture, or we have this idol, and I'll tell you, it is a picture of Mary. Because we do know what she looked like, of course. We have the original photograph that was taken for the church directory in Jerusalem. So we have a picture of Mary. Really? You know, Madonna and Child. What's the deal with all of that? We say we don't have idols, and then we get all excited about things like that. And some wood from the cross. They have given out and sold enough wood from the cross to build 7 or 8 houses. It just amazes me. And people, we went to Palestine, and we were baptized in the Jordan River. Yeah, the water in the Jordan River is sacred water. Besides, it's not the same water that was there when Jesus was there. It's flowed on out into the Dead Sea. But we get all excited about these kind of things and say, we don't have idols, and yet we have to have an image. I remember some time ago with the congregation where I was, there came this request by some of the people in the congregation to put a figure of a cross behind the baptistry because they did not have draperies. It was just an open piece of wall. And somebody said, let's put a picture of a cross up there, or some wood, and make it look like a cross. And we had these 2 elements in the congregation. Those that said, yeah, that'd be beautiful. And the other side who said, no, that would be an idol. And I thought, really? Who's going to bow down and worship that thing? I didn't know anybody was. And that's what an idol's about. Not that there's an image of a cross. And I talked about this one time, and I don't remember how many there were, but I counted the number of crosses in this building. And it was amazing. You realize on every end of the pew there's a cross. You look at the songbooks and there's a cross. Everywhere you look in this building there are crosses. We don't bow down and worship them. There's nothing wrong with a religious symbol. The point is, don't make it a god and get so excited about it that it accompanies some place in your life. That's not proper. But then, the second point is, do we make our own idols? Do we make our own gods? I want to give you a list of about 5 of them real quickly. Won't take very long to do this at all. What about God is all-loving and would never think of punishing anybody? Do you know people who worship that God? Oh, God just loves everybody. And He's going to save everybody. And have you noticed in obituaries that you can take the town drunk who has lived a grossly immoral life, and when he dies, all of a sudden he becomes a saint. He's welcomed into the arms of Jesus in heaven. And I think, I don't really believe that's the way that works. God is not all heart. God, like us, has more than one part to His personality. Behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of God, Romans 11:22. Upon them which fell severity, but toward thee goodness, if you continue in His work. Otherwise, you'll also be cut off. God's not one-dimensional. But there are people who believe, I can't believe that he was a really nice guy. I can't believe that he'd be lost. God just loves everybody. Well, God does love everybody, but God's always a just God too, and He punishes. And then how about this God? God's a tyrant. And He's anxious to condemn for even the slightest mistake. God will get you for that. Sinners in the hands of an angry God. A famous sermon by Edwards. He said that sinners were hung over the pits of hell by like a spider on a single thread, and God was just looking for an excuse to cut the thread. That's not the God I serve. God is a God who punishes. But 2 Peter 3:9 says He's not willing that any should perish, but that all men should come to repentance. And what about this God? God's an absent landlord who collects the rent on Sunday morning and cares nothing for the rest of the week. Just so I show up on Sunday morning, I've paid my dues. I put in my appearance and I'm okay. That's all God cares about. Well, I don't think that's right. Jesus said if you're going to follow me, you have to pick up your own cross and deny yourself and follow me daily. There's more to Christianity than Sunday morning. And I think we need to learn that, though, folks. You know, we have a good crowd tonight. But do you realize in many churches, the difference between the Sunday morning and the Sunday evening service in numbers is alarming? If you have 100 on Sunday morning, you're lucky to have 40 on Sunday night, maybe 50 if it's really a good church. And you wonder where are the rest of the people? It's because we're sold on Sunday morning Christianity and think there's nothing to it more than that. What about that God is responsible for all the misfortunes and tragedies in the world? God brings all things on us. It's God's will. They got hit by a truck driver who was drunk and killed all of them, but that was God's will. No, it wasn't. God didn't sell the guy the liquor. He didn't tell him to drink it. And he didn't tell him to get behind the wheel. And he didn't tell him to drive and to run into some innocent family. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, in whom is no variableness, neither shadow cast by his turning. James 1:17. And then God is a regional, racial God and does not care for everybody. We have a harder time with that one than we think. We think, I'm using we accommodatively, a lot of folks believe that God's a white American God. And I got news for you, he's not. God does not love people depending upon their race or their place of dwelling. He just loves everybody. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. You know that verse. One of America's favorites. And then in Mark 16, that famous, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He wants the gospel preached to the whole world. And I give these only as an example to say that although we would say, I keep that second commandment, I don't have any idols that I bow down and worship. Maybe we do. Maybe we just mold one in our mind. And that's the God we want. To meet the God who is God, we need to read his word from Genesis on and meet him. And when we get to the New Testament, we need to see him in his Son Jesus and let all of that sink in. And we accept him and respect him and obey him for who he is. He is Jehovah. He is the one who created us and sustains us. If he were to take his hand away from us, we would not exist. He is the one who is our Father in heaven. And we need to see him as that spiritual being without form, but that God who is above all. There's no other God like him. Here's my conclusion. I'll leave this with you. This command does not prohibit art and sculpture and paintings. I don't want you to think that. If you've got a picture of Mary or a picture of Jesus in your house, fine. You've got a picture of the Last Supper, I'll tell you that's not correct, the way they have them sitting at the table in chairs, all facing the camera. They were at low tables, reclining on their elbow around a table. It was just different. It was a different culture. But if you have those pictures, that's fine. I know you don't bow down and worship them. That's where it becomes wrong. That's what's bad. The only thing that's wrong is when we make those things the object of our worship. And this second commandment prohibits low, inadequate, unworthy imaginations of God. So if you have an imagination of God in your mind, I will tell you, let it be as the Scriptures reveal, not as you want him to be and think that he might be. We must keep a clear vision of God. I mentioned when we began this series that the first 4 commandments dealt with our relationship with God. The last 6 deal with our relationship with one another. So the third commandment is that we should respect the name of God. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Boy, doesn't that one need to be discussed. So I hope you'll be with us next Sunday evening for that.